this throne, the throne of Britain, came from Scotland, and that this is the same thing with the sword and the stone. When they were doing all these tests on lodestones, the first articles I can find on them come from like the 1840s, 1830s. There's some in the late 1700s, but I can't really trace them. They're hooking batteries up to them, and they're doing all kinds of crazy experiments with the lodestones. But anyways, this sacred throne, the story goes that people would sit on the chair and the stone would hiss and squeal, and they would know that that person wasn't fit to be king. So when they'd finally get a person that could sit on top of the lodestone and it would be silent, that's who would be king. It's the same story with the sword and the stone. When they found the person who could remove the sword from the lodestone. So it's a magnetism thing.
So yeah, are you about to tell me that Eden is not in Missouri, but Nevada? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean there are many Edens in my opinion, but yeah, this is a great article. It talks about a cave system, the Lehman Cave, where they found Egyptian hieroglyphics,
right?
Giant skeletons, the story of Adam and Eve pictorially written in the cave. Very interesting. And here's the article. You know, people have seen the images of how they were hydraulically mining California in, you know, the gold rush, late 1840s, 1850s. This is from, even though it says Nevada, it's California, Cardiff. They found giants. They were petrified into silver and gold and all these different elements. And they found with the giants bones of yet huger animals on which they used to ride, judging from the saddles as large as dump carts found still strapped on their backs.
Wow.
So they're finding 20, 30-foot giants. I have petrified horses that are 50 feet tall in California. So you can only imagine what kind of things they were finding. But this is a great article because it covers a lot of what I just said. It talks about that the giants were petrified into different quartz crystals and ores, that they were much larger than the 8-foot giants we're so used to reading about, and animals that were saddled. So we got giants riding giant horses.
And hopefully some giant sloth, because that would be just...
Oh, you know I got giant sloths.
Thank you, bro.
Have you seen that one? Didn't I share it with you?
I hope so. If not,
I think I
do
did.
it again
You'll
anyway.
love it. Here.
Yeah. Regardless.
Patagonian Indians trap giant sloth in a cave, fence it in, feed it grass, and milk it.
Big deal that they're talking. It's just because it's an ancient extinct animal, right? Like, what? Wait, what? Okay, hold on.
I'll just read this one. And again, not too far away to the south lies the former Republic of Patagonia, divided now between Chile and Argentina. The Patagonians, wild, powerfully built Indians, had succeeded in domesticating the giant sloth, the Mylodon,
there we go,
whose amiable disposition and gigantic bulk had made it possible for the prehistoric natives to fence this huge mammal in a cave where they fed it with cut grass and milked it, perhaps a barrel or more at a milking. So, yeah. It's funny you brought that up.
And then the Europeans, this was one of the stupidest animals ever. The next paragraph, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh. Riding giant beavers. That sounds way worse. Paradox fossils. Come on. But yeah, I mean, the idea that there's these ancient giant creatures that were beyond, I mean, because we think of horses and we think of elephants and things, but there's a lot of weird looking things. I mean, you know, Cambell, Australia, like there's a lot of weird looking animals all over the place. And I think this comes up when people say, well, that doesn't look exactly like an elephant or a horse or something like that. Well, yeah, it might have been their equivalent creature, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, if you can keep your mind open enough, things like this just reinforce, you know, Stellium's giant elephant.
Right.
Understanding that in the vapor canopy and, you know, density changes, oxygen levels would create creatures far larger. You know, it's not a myth. You know, I have skeletal remains found in the Gobi Desert, 900 feet long, you know, so Again, that's not as large as Stellium's elephant, but it goes to show you these things were public knowledge. Sea serpents that were 500 feet long, many of these. I got one right here that I brought up, I think. Yeah. Pulse of Western Progress. 120-foot long dragon found in Utah. Circular hole descended 80 feet, vast underground cavern. Grandest sight ever beheld by man. Petrified reptile, perfect in every detail, 18-inch curved fangs. Only perfect specimen of a dragon in existence. And that's in Utah.
Now they just sweep it all under the category of dinosaurs, and that anything giant must have just been from the dinosaur time, and that it was a dinosaur, and that clearly the environment was substantially different at that time for all of this megafauna to exist, and that if there was hominids or intelligent beings habitating the realm at that time, they also would have been giant.
Well, just a good quick reminder, if you could pull on my page for a second, is just that if you go to Wikipedia on birds, right, and you type in like dinosaur, you'll find birds are feathered theropod dinosaurs and constitute the only known living dinosaurs. So let's just remember what rebranding is and how this guy became a penguin and was once thought of as actually the dinosaur bird, the Arctic dinosaur. You know, and realistically, that's what scientists are still thinking. So our whole pterosaur,
isn't it?
Right? Think about it.
Clearly,
basically, we have a lot of questions to ask about giant birds flying around, leaving their nests in New Zealand. You know, what's up?
What about the whole fact that there's all the flightless birds are in the southern ring,
right?
Not in the northern.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's like almost like because the flightless migrations that all lead to the North Pole, and the birds are following magnetism.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, they were talking about
that's how desperate they were to follow the magnet that they had to grow wings. That's interesting.
They had to grow wings, man. Yeah,
get there.
Well,
they had Red Bull on them, luckily.
This goes back to what we were talking about with the storks and the symbology of the stork. And
because there's a whole thing about the stork war, isn't there? The stork fighting the pygmies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was in the northern latitudes. One of the islands of Hyperborea was labeled the land of pygmies. Yeah, and that the storks would come out at different times of the year, specific times. And
pics and pictograms. The idea that the pics were pygmies is a thing.
100%.
So were they picking up pygmies and dropping them off, and we're going, look at these little people, they're babies.
I mean, that's not far off possible.
Yeah.
No, it's
the other way is that they were the indigenous, humans of those areas or something, and that they were replaced, eaten.
This is the thing about like the giants, the taller humans. Like it looks like in the sort of 1700s that most humans were sort of 9, 10, even 12 footers. Like, do you think that the genetic engineering or the reintroduction of babies was to shrink us down? Do you think that was done on purpose, or do you think we're actually pygmies, or what do you think? You got any thoughts on that?
It would seem the most likely to me that the smaller races are the ones that lived underground.
Okay.
The largest underground, because I've found tons of caves that weren't just caves; they were man-made. And, some of them were sepulchers for giants, but they were never bigger than 8 feet. I think the big giants lived on the surface. And the repopulated race, it would make the most sense, would be the humans that we're used to today. And that the giants that still walk among us today that are predominantly Hyperborean or melanin races that still preserve some of that giant gene would be the quote unquote leftovers, or the
6 foot pygmy would be a good band name. I'm into it.
The interbreeding, right?
6 foot pygmy.
The gods could be the ones that dwelled on the surface, and people as we know us today, the biblical quote unquote sons of Noah would be us. I don't
From
necessarily
underground?
totally agree with. I think that's just a creative reset story, and it also, I think, is astrological. You know, there weren't 4 seasons, there were 3 seasons.
Right. All the Egyptian calendars.
Yeah,
Clear.
and autumn is summer. So there was no autumn. It was just winter, spring, and summer. And
yeah, flood season. They called one of them, right?
yeah, and exactly. Yep. And the Noah and was Janus. Janus is the lodestone.
2 of every
Magnetism.
kind.
Correct. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, feminine, masculine, positive, negative. The lodestone created a living representation of itself, and reproduction is a perfect example of that. And then it always goes back to magnetism, dielectricity. That's the root of it all, and that's why all religions worship the lodestone, the magnetic stone, the monad, Janus. Yeah.
So is the stone of scone? Is that a lodestone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jacob's ladder,
right,
is an oceanic pathway for lodestones.
He dreams at the base of these angels ascending and descending upon a.
Exactly. Yeah, and the I can't remember the name of the chair, but there's a throne.
Right, in Britain, the Scottish throne.
And it came from exactly. And that there was this throne, the throne of Britain, came from Scotland, and that this is the same thing with the sword and the stone. The chair. So when they were doing all these tests on lodestones, the first articles I can find on them come from like the 1840s, 1830s. There's some in the late 1700s, but I can't really trace them. They're hooking batteries up to them, and they're doing all kinds of crazy experiments with the lodestones. But anyways, this sacred throne, the story goes that people would sit on the chair and the stone would hiss and squeal, and they would know that that person wasn't fit to be king. So when they'd finally get a person that could sit on top of the lodestone and it would be silent, that's who would be king. It's the same story with the sword and the stone. When they found the person who could remove the sword from the lodestone. So it's a magnetism thing.
Right, and the stone sometimes is an anvil just to make it like punch the point home for people.
Right.
The anvil and the stone.
Yeah, you can, I mean, Mecca, it's Greek, and it means to whirl. So you look at the Muslims of today make their pilgrimage to Mecca, and they circle the lodestone.
Being an automaton in the old days didn't mean to be a robot. It meant to be kind of like in Islam,
hypnotized.
Yeah, but also to be like in harmony with like God's will. The way, kind of true. Hypnotize is a word for
it. Well, magnetism, mesmerism, and hypnotism are all the same thing.
Oh, mesmer.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And when you study language far enough, and Andreas has heard me talk about this a lot, but I haven't talked about this on a public forum very much. But Julian Jaynes wrote probably one of the most incredible books there is today, and it's about the bicameral mind. And he hypothesized that before there were 2 hemispheres of the brain, there was one united hemisphere, and that everyone was living in a kind of unity consciousness, and that they were all speaking God's will, kind of like Andreas just said. So you weren't without the 2 hemispheres of the mind, where you can remove yourself essentially consciously from the wholeness that we are all involved in, because really we're all one thing. That consciousness, or the bicameral hemispheres of the brain, created the potentiality for us to be conscious beings. And that he hypothesized that only 1,000 years ago there wasn't this conscious.
Much more rare.
Correct. It was very rare.
Perhaps and if you had this feeling happen to you, you would feel like God is speaking through you.
Exactly. Yeah. And he, that you can tie this into a lot of the early Arabic writers said that the poets were the true gods, which is interesting because when you study language and poetry and all these things, it becomes very interesting. You know, where did language really come from, and how does it, you know, because language only exists in one hemisphere, whereas almost all of human existence, as we know it, exists in both hemispheres. So you have redundancy, right? You have an accident, you have motor skills in both. You know, you can have some kind of trauma to your left brain, a stroke, and you can still regain motor function. But language exists only in the left brain.
Right.
So it's very interesting.
Interesting experiments with that, haven't they? With language and cognition, where people have like lost, you know, hemispheres and things.
Well, also the wolf child is the gnarliest one to me, and I know we've talked about this before, Analog, but it's the girl in San Diego, and there's the French story as well. There's a number of these stories of kids raised by wolves. The Soviet Union,
Fantastic.
You have kids, and they did MRIs finally. I mean, back in the 19th century, you just had a French boy in the woods. It's a little harder, but today, with the Soviet Union abandoning kids and with kids locked in their homes in San Diego doing the MRIs, we could see what changes happen to the human brain. And it's very interesting because it's almost as if without that part of your brain, without it being trained, it doesn't grow and just wilts like a flower that's potentially there to make these connections. You have all these blank neurons waiting to make connections. But if they don't happen, they're gone. And so it's as if we're wet wire programmed with this logic algorithmic operating system that's been put into us, and we teach it self-replicate that operating system, but that it's not part of humanity. That is a separate thing, an entity that's
it's not nature.
Right.
Yeah. It's magnetism again, because shout out Paul, Black Sheep researcher, What the Flock TV. Good friend of mine.
Black Sheep.
We've been bouncing our Janus material off each other for quite a while now. And his ether work, right? Ether is the fifth element. The true alchemical work involves words and, you know, speech and spelling, you know, grammar.
Angular sounds, I think, is
grammar. Yeah, grammar and grimoires. And, you know, the English, the angelic language. When you speak your words, you're creating, and this is the whole concept of the wizard. And in an older age, when the ether was probably much more energetically charged, you could literally create things in front of you just by speech. And this has kind of fallen into the occultic, dark arts, black magic realms of today. But yeah,
but it's starting to come back. It's starting to come back into mainstream subconsciousness or mainstream consciousness with virtual reality, augmented reality, the metaverse. They're trying to make it a psychological.
Well, that's the false creation. Yeah. So do you think that kind of stuff's going to come back? Like, do you?
Yeah, because eventually people raised inside the matrix. People raised inside the matrix are eventually going to have so for now, we're like, oh, there's a difference between reality and the internet. But kids raised tomorrow who aren't allowed outside aren't going to know that. They're going to understand that world, and they're going to function inside of it. And eventually I think that it'll just transform everything into magic again. Yeah,
I did a breakdown on the Matrix quite a while ago, but this ties in with that, right? The Janus symbology is incredibly rich in the Matrix. His room is 101, which is the number of Janus 11, and he follows the white rabbit. And what happens when he wakes up, right? He unplugs, and the plug is in the back of his head, which this goes into the letter Q.
Right.
The letter Q is really interesting. It symbolizes the back of the head or the nape. Cough. Q is also the symbol of magnetism. It represents the compass. It also represents the egg and the sperm. Reproduction, positive and negative, the two ends of the magnet. And yeah, language and Janus go hand in hand. The two letters that represent Janus are AI. So Janus is the artificial intelligence, which is the lodestone. Remember, these things were deities. So perhaps in an age similar to what I was mentioning, where Julian James was talking about humans weren't conscious in the way that we know of them. I think that we were living, because children, until about the age of 7, their brains are actually functioning in theta, which is hypnotic. That's the hypnotic vibration.
I don't see the separation,
Correct. And that he postulates that perhaps we couldn't get out of theta. And we were taking our orders essentially from these deities, these lodestones. And maybe through genetic manipulation, a change in the environment, our hemispheres of the brain separated. And true consciousness, polarity, came into existence. And you can see that in everything. Everything's dualistic in this world. And the hardest thing for people to remember is that we're all from the same source, right? Returning to the source, which is, again, the monad, the symbol for Janus, and our realm, right? The symbol of Atlantis, the symbol of the flat earth, Mount Meru in the center, so on and so forth. But yeah, that's a rabbit hole. So.
The original language was one of like full cymatics, where like you literally would be manifesting, not necessarily matter, but like shape and form, like energy through speech.
Yes.
Kind of
Or
like
is this pre-language, because language is that, part of the brain that's referencing.
Language is post the division of the brain.
Right. Lacan even agrees. I think we'll go with it.
That would be frequency, more like frequency. Like you could use sound to create.
It's interesting because Slavoj Zizek talks about the perversion of language. He's got like a pervert's guide to cinema and things like that. But what he means is that like we pervert reality into stories about it. And so if I were to share what happened today and literally just give you my memory of it, that would be very different than me telling you, oh man, I had a great day. And let me just set the scene for you. There was a, and I could tell you all these nice, like your midget walks into your bar is funnier than my midget walking into my bar. It's your midget. So we're constantly perverting our ideas of existentialism through language. If we got rid of language completely, which is kind of what Elon Musk is talking about with Neuralink, right? Let me just send you. He even talked about sharing sexual experiences, right? That you would Neuralink if you're an exhibitionist, you could share your experience and someone else could experience it. Again, very different than reading a smutty poem or magazine, like to actually be in the scenario with the sensorial information.
Yeah. Yeah. And they talk about, these people, they're quote unquote gifted, and they can kind of pick up on energy of other people, or they can touch people and get their memories, or they get an organ donated through some kind of surgery, and they develop these ghost limbs, ghost memories.
Izzy video talking about the cymatic speech in the recital of the Quran. I hope you've seen some of the David Ewing Jr. talks we've done on Islam in Arabic, because it is very fascinating and how ancient it is and transcendent.
He's one of my favorite authors. So shout out Andreas and his David videos. They are some of my favorite. I've watched them countless times. He has been saying what I've been saying to you for so long, Andreas.
Word.
That when you trace languages back, you'll keep falling on Arabic.
True. And whatever it was that Arabic, because they want to call it a Proto-Arabic language. So that's another interesting thing looking at, because Sanskrit's so much newer than we think it is, and Tamil is so much more connected to Finnish than we thought it was. All these things are starting to really pull together. So again, Dr. Longo from Old World, Florida, talking about the wellspring of language, which is Welsh. Right. And Welsh is just so crazy. The more you dig into it and find Turkish and Arabic.
Exactly. Yeah. The Arabic roots are really interesting. And I was led down that rabbit hole first through the money with Bert.
Always follow the money, but really, if you're.
Yeah. And I was finding Arabic dominant currency where currency had just started. So there was no currency.
Germany loves a lot. Allemans, right? That's what that is, right?
Russia, Gotland. Me and Longo talked about this on one of his shows, but Gotland is an incredible place. It's constructed in the middle of the Baltic. The Gulf Stream connects to it. So if the world was in an ice age or a mini ice age, you would have a direct unfrozen stream that would lead you from Gotland to Florida.
Right.
But Gotland is a what I would hypothesize to be a completely terraformed man-made island. It's made of Kachina shell concrete, just like what a lot of the stuff he's been pointing out. And it has, still to this day, the largest collection of Arabic coins ever found. And this is dozens of these articles where they find one, and then the next find is even bigger. They're like, holy shit, this is even bigger than the one we found in 1850. Then they find another one. The biggest one ever was just like 2011. They found it the biggest they'd ever found on the island. And all of these succeeding discoveries are bigger than anywhere in the world. And come to find out, the foundations of Admiralty law have their roots on Gotland.
We all want to live a healthier, more natural life. And after the last few years, many of us are a little wary of doctors and their wares. So, in my opinion, it's a good idea to learn how to grow your own. That's right, grow your own medicinal plants. But how do you do that? Well, you do it with the complete natural pharmacy for your backyard. Now, this garden medicinal kit actually comes with the seeds you'll need. It comes with the seeds of 10 easy-to-grow plants that you can grow in your garden. And then it also shows you how to turn these plants into salves, tinctures, teas, etc., that you can use to heal yourself and your family naturally. There's yarrow, the backyard wound healer. Marshmallow, which is great for any digestive issues you might be having. Evening primrose, a natural remedy for skin and nerves. And echinacea, which is the most powerful immunity plant, and everyone should be growing it, and much more. So click the link below in the description and find out some more information of how you can start to grow your own medicinal herbs and start to take charge of your own and your family's health. Click the link below and start to heal yourself naturally.
Remember, in the end, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Come on!